Hello, everyone. This is Ed Breniger, and welcome to the Eddy Network podcast. My guest today is Rachel Simon, and she is a networker who is doing some really interesting things, but I want her to describe who she is and why networking is so important to her. So welcome, Rachel. I'm glad you're here. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Ed. It's a real honor to be invited to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So tell us about who you are and what you've done and how you came to have this interest in networking, because that's a big topic here on the Eddy Network podcast. And so we want to hear what you have to say about networking and learn from you.
Well, let me start out by saying that I am a wife and a mom. So my husband, Jason, and I have two almost empty nested kids.
Hey.
So our daughter is a junior at University of Arizona, and our son is just about to go to KU in Kansas. And we are excited about this next phase of life. And so it is just a perfect opportunity for me to explore things that are even more important to me that might have been important in the past, but I haven't had as much time for. And you hit upon it already, Ed. It's relationships. And when people hear the word networking, I think they get cold and clammy and they don't know what to do with that word. And then when I say relationships, that's a warm and cozy word, and they know what to do with that. Yeah. And so that's what I try to expand people's thinking, is that we are wired as human beings to crave other people's attention and their respect and their admiration and their companionship and everything else. And especially in the workplace, we want that. We need that. We spend so many hours working with our colleagues. And so that is what I've become very passionate about, is teaching people how to do it, because I cracked the code. I guarantee you that my family would have voted me least likely to be an expert on networking because I'm a shy, introverted person, but I cracked the code and now I'm passionate about teaching other people about it.
That's excellent. So what is the code that you cracked? What's that mystery that you cracked that now you understand and that you're sharing with people around the world?
Imagine going into a ballroom, and you tell me if you like this, Ed, or if this makes you all sweaty. If you go into a ballroom, a happy hour, everybody has a drink in hand, and you have to go meet people, does that excite you or does that intimidate you?
Oh, it excites me. I'm very extroverted, but
okay,
we'll say this, 50 years ago, that would not have been what I would have said.
Okay, so you are an extrovert, and that fills you up. It excites you.
Yeah, it really
and you want to talk to as many people as possible.
No, I'm going to talk to everyone in the room.
You'll talk to everybody.
I'm going to talk to everyone. That's the way I operate.
Okay, so everyone, be more like Ed and less like Rachel. Here's how I'm wired. I walk into the room and I survey it, and I immediately think everybody's already paired up. I immediately think that everybody already has a conversation partner. I immediately get intimidated and I just want to leave. And in early years of my career, I did leave. And then I started forcing myself to go in and talk to people, but it's hard. But what I cracked the code on is that those kind of environments are very difficult for me as an introvert. I'm friendly and cheerful, but that's not being an extrovert. Introvert is how I get filled up and where I draw my energy from. So I don't like those big environments, but where I really draw energy from is one-on-one. And so I'll do the big ballrooms, the big happy hours if I have to, it's part of my job. But what I really enjoy is the one-on-ones. And so I go to lunch or coffee with someone almost every day. And it could be virtual. They could be on the other side of the world, but those one-on-ones, when I say I cracked the code, that's how I cracked it, is that I know that the key to relationships and to finding something in common is having those one-on-one conversations.
So what you're talking about is one of the things that happens here at the Eddy Network podcast. You and I have never had a conversation until about 10 minutes ago.
That's right.
We have started a relationship. We have started a conversation. And probably a third to a half of the people I've interviewed here, this is the way it is. So the question is, what do you do when you meet someone? What is it? What are the questions you're asking? How are you initiating that interaction that you have with someone?
So most people detest small talk because they think it's shallow, and it is. But you have to have small talk in order to get to deeper talk. You just can't go up to somebody and say, tell me about your culture, tell me about your heritage, tell me about your hopes and dreams. You can't do that until you have that shallow talk first to see what you might have in common. And so let's put the big networking events aside, because those are mostly just going to be shallow talk. But when I say that I have these one-on-ones, when I invite someone to go to coffee or to go to lunch, I'll start out with the small talk. Tell me about your weekend. Tell me about your family. And then I'll look for those things that we have in common.
Yes.
Oh, you've been to Costa Rica. I've been to Costa Rica. Oh, you went to University of Texas. I went to University of Texas. Sometimes it's not a match. Sometimes that I have to dig really deep. You breathe, I breathe. Yay, we have something in common. But the quicker that I can find things that I have in common, it just makes the conversation flow so organically. And I always have 10 conversation starters in mind, always, because the worst thing to do is to get to lunch with someone and then it just falls like a loud thump because there's nothing to talk about. You don't have to do any research. Don't stalk their LinkedIn or anything to find what you have in common, but have questions to ask. So that way you can find out those similarities and those differences. So that way you can probe on those too.
What are some of the questions you ask people? I'm curious now. You've piqued my interest.
Well, it all is open-ended, and it all starts with the words, tell me about. Tell me about how you got into your career. Tell me about the kind of fun things you do with your family. Tell me about when you're not working, what you do for fun and how you unwind. So it all starts with those kind of words, tell me about. If you ask the close-ended, yes or no, guess what you're going to get?
Oh, yeah.
Yes or no. But when you start with true interest, but then this, Ed, the key is to have a dialogue, that as you're listening to what that person is saying, you think to yourself, what do I know that might be helpful to this person? Oh, your family really enjoys hiking. I discovered this new trail. Let me tell you about it. Let me write out the directions of where it is. But it's having a dialogue and it's a back and forth.
So I've been to these events like you have, and you go in and you walk up to someone and you introduce yourself. And what you end up hearing from that person is their pitch back to you. They're just going to talk about you and they're never going to ask a question about who you are. So how do you help structure a conversation so it gets it beyond simply me telling you everything about my life and never listening to what you have to say? How do we manage those kinds of situations?
Yeah, well, the people that monopolize a conversation, they're doing networking wrong, right? And we usually look for an off-ramp from those conversations as quickly as possible. So if your listeners that are listening to this right now, if you think, uh-oh, is that me? Have more of a dialogue. Don't be the one doing all the talking. I think everybody's heard that phrase, elevator pitch. It's how do you describe yourself and the time it would take two people to ride an elevator. It has to be crisp and it has to be succinct. Sometimes I'll talk to someone for 20 minutes and I still haven't learned anything interesting about them. So you need to practice. You need to figure out what you want to say. And then you would say, how about you? So here's a little bit about me. Now you tell me about you. And that's how the conversation evolves.
So are you saying that having these conversations may be an indication of areas of our own personal development that have been missing, and we need to develop some areas like being able to have a pitch, which is really saying, well, these are the values that are important to me, and this is how they are reflected in the work that I do, something like that.
Yeah, I think that's an astute comment, and we're all evolving. My conversation skills 30 years ago are so different than my conversation skills today, that I have learned and grown and had other people model it for me. But there's sometimes people will come up to me and say, Rachel, I desperately want a mentor. How do I get a mentor? Well, you just can't get a mentor. It all has to start from a networking relationship. You reach out to someone, you say, I heard you talk on that panel, or I read something that you wrote. Can we get 20 minutes together? And then when you have a good conversation where you are both interested and interesting, that's when you say, this is amazing. Can we do this again next quarter? And if it's something that the other person looks forward to, of course, they would say yes. But it all has to start from that dialogue. So it really matters what you say, even in that first interaction.
So tell us about where you work and how these skills have developed where you work, and how you utilize them with the people that you work with.
I'm an executive at AT&T, and I think everybody knows AT&T, but it's a wonderful telecommunications company, wireless, fiber, etc. And I've been here my whole career. I've been here almost 29 years, and I've just had a remarkable career and love everything about this company. And so about 9 years ago, one of my mentoring circles, if you're not familiar with a mentoring circle, it's where 10 to 12 people get together monthly and talk about issues that are important to them. One of the mentoring circles that I led, they asked me if I would teach them how to network. And I quickly said no, because I didn't know what I would say. I knew I was good at relationships, but I didn't know how to teach this. And they were very persistent. They kept needling me and saying, oh, this would be the best mentoring circle ever. If only you would teach us how to network. So fine, all right. I rose to the occasion and I sat down and I made a list of tips that I had on how to network. And it became a very popular speech because I made it come to life by pairing all of my tips with real emails that people have either sent me or I've sent someone else. And so it demystified. So when you say networking is important, okay, how? I show people how. And so every time I do the presentation, someone says, Rachel, you should write a book. And so I did. It was a long process, and I'm so proud of the final result. And there's Ed holding it up. Yes, the cover is beautiful. I love the cover. I love everything about the book. It's available September 12th. And if it sounds like I'm plugging the book, it's because I am. Ed, I know that we've talked about this, that 100% of the profits go to the United Way. And so I would love to make a double impact with this book, not only for the reader to get all of these ideas on how to network, but also with the money raised on how we can impact the community.
I see books as a networking gimmick, a gimmick in the very best sense. It's a way of introducing. It's kind of like a business card. It's a business card. Oh, I wrote this book. Oh, really? Tell me about it. And then you say something, and then you say, well, what about this? So you have a way to ask them the questions based on what you've written in your book, and it's a sparkling way to start a conversation. So
and you've written a terrific book, so you know the effort that goes into it, and so rewarding when you can have this kind of conversations based on what you've written.
Well, and I think if you've done a very good job of writing the book, if you thought through it well, then it becomes a book that stands the test of time, and it won't be just something that'll sell for a week or two, because it's a pop version of depth of something else, but it really has some depth, and it really has answers for people in ways of doing things that people are looking for. So I suspect your book, I've looked through your book, I've read part of it, and I suspect it's going to be really popular. And I think it's not technically a leadership book, but it's a skill set that leaders need. And I think for that reason, it's an important book. But
thank you.
So, but I want to delve more into the things that you have done that then gave you the insight to write the book. So I want to come back to the book later. I want to talk more about that, but I really want to hear some of the things that you've done at AT&T beyond this speech that you give and not beyond the mentoring that allows people to gain some facility in actually networking. I know you've done some things, so can you tell us some of that?
You're giving me such a platform to talk about everything I'm passionate about. So yes,
that's exactly what this podcast is for, is to grant my guests a platform so they can shine and really show their genius to the world.
Well, I would love to share something called Dine, D-I-N-E. And when people hear that I'm writing a book, they say, oh, is Dine in the book? And Dine is about 1 page in the book. So that's about it. But so back in 2016, there were several incidents that started to hit the media of some African Americans that were shot and killed by police officers. And this started to really tug at my heart, because that's not my experience as a white woman, that when I'm pulled over, that something could go south. And I'm a huge supporter of the police, and I didn't know what to think. And I'm a huge supporter of all of my diverse friends, and I didn't know what to think. And then that same week that all of these things started to happen, right down the street in Dallas from where I work, 5 police officers were killed by someone that wanted to
Remember
white
that.
police officers. And that affected me as well. And so whenever I don't know what to do, I just try to take a step back and listen and get another perspective. And so my husband and I decided to go to church. And this is a big deal because my husband and I are both Jewish. And so we wanted to just get a different perspective. And so we asked around and we heard of a place called the Potter's House. And it's a big church here in Dallas, and it's helmed by Bishop T.D. Jakes.
Yeah.
And I never heard of T.D. Jakes at the time. Of course, now I'm a huge fan and I see him everywhere. And we went that day, and it was the most remarkable experience. Not only did we enjoy everything about it, but T.D. Jakes' sermon that day was called Redefining My Hood. And what he meant by that is that if we're only friends with the people that live on our street or that we went to school with, no wonder nobody understands each other. And he was encouraging us to redefine our hood. And my husband and I talked the whole way home about everything we learned and asked ourselves, is this something we need to do? And of course, the answer is yes. And I even got to thinking about, even at AT&T, that we have all of these amazing employee groups. Sometimes they're called employee resource groups, affinity groups at a company. And what was I the most involved in at the time? The woman of finance. Why? Because I was a woman and I was in finance. It's what was comfortable for me. And so I came in and I joined a couple more that very next Monday. But I felt like there was still more to do. And I would think about this every day. And then one day I was on social media at night and I came across a meme. And the meme said something like this. It said a Christian, a Muslim, a Jew, and an atheist walk into a coffee shop and they talk and laugh and drink coffee and become friends, because that's what happens when you're not a jerk. Except it didn't say jerk. It was a different word. Yeah. And I remember thinking, this meme is the missing link. And so I came into work the next day and I invited 5 people to lunch who are different than me. I've already mentioned that I'm Jewish, and I invited a colleague who's Muslim, and someone who's Latina, and someone who is African-American, and someone who is a white male and gay, and someone who's a Chinese immigrant. And I told them what I wanted to do, and we were also energized. We cleared our calendar, went to lunch that week. And so we went to this Mexican restaurant. We sat in the middle of the restaurant, people all around us. And I said, let's go around and introduce ourselves. Not the way we normally do. Not, hi, Rachel, Rachel, I've got 2 kids, but let's talk about our communities and how we were brought up and the lens through which we look through life. And I'm telling you, Ed, you could have heard a pin drop at this table. We were just all leaning in and listening. And it's important to note that I knew everybody because I invited them, but they didn't know each other. And so the biggest surprise was how deep everybody went so quickly. It's like people want to talk about this. They just are never asked. And so we knew we were onto something special. We gave it a name. We called it DINE, which stands for Discover Differences, Include One Another, Navigate New Perspectives, and Eat. You can do it virtually and do a DIN, but dines are much more fun. And yeah. I asked them, will you host your own lunch? Will you host? And the most amazing thing happened is that this just spread. It just spread like wildfire. And after I had done a couple of these DINE lunches, I remember thinking, I wonder if I should tell human resources, what I'm doing. And I'm so glad that I didn't stop to get permission, because this just made it a grassroots effort. And it's still, DINE is still so popular today, not only at AT&T, but at all other companies. And I do have a website, if anybody's interested to learn more about this, Do Lunch Differently, DoLunchDifferently.com. And on the website, I have how you would invite people and some pictures. But it has been one of the most fulfilling things I've ever done, because not only is it networking, and not only have I increased my professional network, but I have just gotten insights into so many different things I never would have. Religions I didn't even know existed. I've changed my mind on a few issues. There's a couple of issues that you only hear about things through the media, and then when you talk to someone one-on-one, so it has been just a true blessing in my life.
So what happened with DINE during the pandemic? Did you all meet still?
Well, that's when we turned it into DINs. So we did it. So we took off the eating part. And interestingly enough, I actually prefer virtual dines more than in person these days, as much as I do love my chips and salsa. And here's why. Because when you do it virtually, first of all, you don't have the restaurant interruptions. You don't have, the server coming to refill your water. But also, then you get geographic diversity. So when you're in person, it's everyone from Dallas. But when you do it virtually, I've had people from all over the world. And so that's made it even more exciting.
That's amazing. That's
Yeah.
you know, you know, I think it's the coolest thing, and it's one of those things that I have thought a lot about, not specifically dying, but this idea of how we break down these boundaries that exist between us. And these boundaries tend to exist because they serve other groups who need us to be isolated from one another in order to maintain their sense of prominence and prestige in the culture. And so when we break down these barriers, which is what we do with networking, I think we begin to create a different environment for people to work. So I want to give you a phrase that I came to see because of my consulting work, and it's, if we look at a company as having a C-suite, an executive level, and then a managerial level, and then a worker level, it's oversimplification. I know I'm saying that. What I discovered as I talk with people at the worker level, that there was this thing I called a persistent residual culture of values that persist because it resides in the relationships of the people. And that networking at work, which is what you're about and what your book is about creating that culture of relationships where we find what it is that we share together so that we can build upon that a better place to work. And when the company recognizes that and says, we like what you're doing, how can we support this? Then you have all kinds of barriers and obstacles to the company's welfare being overcome and things change.
That's exactly right. And we have so many more similarities than we have differences.
I totally agree. I've said that so many times this past year.
Yes.
So who is noticing dying? Who's seeing this? And the extent of this, is it still your thing, or is it broken out of that, the boundary of this being Rachel Simon's project to becoming something that is shared much more broadly?
Yes. I remember my husband saying to me about a year into Dine, he said, you'll know that Dine is truly successful when you get invited to a Dine with them not knowing that you were the creator. And that happened. In fact, I was on a panel talking about some diversity and inclusion issues, and the panelist next to me said, oh, have you heard of this amazing thing called Dine? And the moderator of the panel had to say, yeah, the creator's sitting right next to you. And I loved it because this isn't about Rachel Simon at all. It's about everybody else. So yes, it just kind of has a life of its own. And that makes me so happy.
Well, the next time I come to Dallas, I'm going to make sure that I go to dine with you.
I would love to dine with you, Ed. Would love that.
that would be a lot of fun. Okay, so you've done some remarkable things, and you have, in my estimation, have shown that you really grasped the whole idea of networking, and so now you've written this book, and I'm looking at your table of contents here, and you have 20 tips. So why did you organize this book around tips? What was the madness in your methodology here that you wanted to kind of give us tips of to do networking?
Well, my personality is I love action. Theory is great and talking about things is great, but I love action. And so that's what I want out of books. That's what I want out of TED Talks, you name it, is what is just a couple of things that I could implement right away. And I felt like the word tips resonates. So it's not just 3 ideas for you. It's, go do these 3 things. And you're right, I do have 20, and all 20 won't resonate with everybody, but surely 3 will. And so I felt like if I broke it up into actionable things, and the way that each chapter is designed, I tell a story about how I learned this tip. I give real emails about how I've seen this in my own life, real emails that I've sent to people or they've sent to me. I should also add, everyone has given me permission to use their emails. I don't want anyone to think if they send me an email, it's going to end up in a book somewhere. So I give real emails. And then I have a section where I give even more examples of verbiage to say, and then some questions to consider. So I feel really good about how the book is set up, so that way somebody could immediately put it into action.
Well, our people who are watching this, I want to give you some of these tips because I think it will incentivize you to go out and buy this book. So the first tip is introduce yourself when you're new in a job. You know, I have been in, obviously I've been in like everyone else, you know, we're the new guy on the block or the new woman on the block in the office. And we're kind of feeling like we have to come in to fit in to who they are. And what you're suggesting here is that we walk in and say, I'm already fitting in and this is who I am. And welcome to my little network here. I mean, something as simple as that. I love that.
Yeah. And the way that I learned this tip really was based on survival. That sometimes we start new jobs and we're just lost. We don't even know where to go, how to get started, how to find the information. And so when you're new in a role and you reach out and say, hey, I'm new, here's what I do. I would love to set up 15, 20 minutes just to get to know what you do. I like the phrase, dig your well before you're thirsty. And so when you have these relationships in place, then they're there when you need it.
And then, okay, here's tip 5, network through your network. Well,
Yes.
that sounds so.
That's what you're all about, Ed.
Well, you know, so I think this may be a help to people understanding what this is. So when I left higher education back in 1995 and I moved our family from West Virginia to North Carolina, I knew 3 people other than family people that I was being introduced to by 3 people from West Virginia. And so I went to them and I said, and this is the networking. This is how you network through your network. I said, who do you know? Now that you know what I want to do, who do you know that you think I should know, and would you introduce me?
Yes.
And those guys, each of those guys gave me between 10 and 15 names and phone numbers. I called all those people up, did the same thing. Who do you know that you think I should know, and would you introduce me? And all my work over the last almost 30 years has come through that kind of networking, simply asking people to introduce me to people. And the people that I'm interviewing here are these kinds of people. So I did.
That's right.
I saw your book on LinkedIn. I said, oh, I got to talk to this gal. But I think that's what you're talking about there.
Yes. Do you know that game you could play with Kevin Bacon, where you can associate him with any actor, actress in Hollywood with 6 degrees of separation? That's how life is. That I may not know who to call, but I know someone who knows someone.
That's right.
And I'm making a sweeping generalization here, but for the most part, human beings want to be helpful. And so it is very rare someone asks me for help or an introduction or advice or guidance that I would say no. And we're just afraid to ask. And so don't be afraid.
Okay, here's another one. We could talk all day about this. Send a note when you come across a photo, video, or article.
Yes.
And let me add to that. Oh, and when you see that, say on Facebook or LinkedIn or someplace like that, leave a comment with a link to the profile of the person you want to see it. And that way you're linking people together. And what I have found, is with my podcast and with my Substack is that making those kinds of comments on other people's sites is a way of building that network of understanding that leads people to want to join you and become subscribers and things like that. So I think
that's a great idea.
Very good.
Yeah. See, you just took my idea and supercharged it. I love that. I love that, a way to bring other people in.
Well, I like your book a lot, and I think it's going to be really valuable. So tell us about the project that follows this book and why. I mean, you wrote this book, but what you're doing with the book and what you're doing with the proceeds is so important. Let's talk about that.
Well, I hope everyone is familiar with United Way. I've been affiliated for a long time, and I just truly believe in what they do and their efforts to help with education, poverty, and healthcare, equal access. They do so much, and they're also an umbrella organization. So many of the organizations, like I'm very involved in Girl Scouts. They're an umbrella. You know, they are affiliated with United Way. So I just love United Way. And I got even more involved in United Way. I mentioned that I'm about to be an empty nester. So I realized that most of my activities, volunteer activities, were tied to my children. So I was a Girl Scout leader, and then that daughter graduated. I was involved in the school, and at some point the kids don't want you involved in school. And so I had more time than ever to focus on things that were important to me. And so I really leaned into United Way. And I just can't say enough great things about their leadership and what they do for the community. So it was a no-brainer when I was deciding where to give the profits of the book. It was a no-brainer that it would go there.
Do you have a particular place within the United Way program there in Dallas that you want to fund? Is there a project there that you want to see emerge as kind of the focal point for your giving?
I don't. I don't want to put any restrictions on it. I trust the leadership to put the money to use where they best see fit.
Well, I think this is now the time for you to pitch us on why we should buy the book, because this will be seen 3 or 4 days before the book is released, and so we want to generate a lot of sales on that launch day, and so that's what it. So tell us why we should buy the book, and then why we should go find our family and friends and tell them they should buy the book.
All right. I love that. You held up a paper copy. I will hold up the real one. Oops, I'm on a virtual
copy. Oh, yeah.
But yeah. So relationships at work, how to authentically network within your company is the name of the title. Why you need it. Well, we all know that networking is important, but nobody teaches us how. And so that's what this book does. This is the book that I wish I had 29 years ago, with real actionable tips on how to network. And if you were to assess your own networking skills, some are so far along, carry on, that's great. But most of us, are struggling with some ideas on how to connect with people, especially once we were sent home for COVID and now we're back and we're hybrid. All of my tips work just as well virtually, by the way. I know because I tested it all out since I worked from home for 2 years before I came back into the office. And so I would love to just share my wisdom that I have garnered throughout the years with everybody else. And then, like I said, it's a chance to make a double impact by helping the community at the same time.
That's fantastic. Well, everyone, the book is Relationships at Work. Rachel B. Simon is the author. I'm sure you can find it at Amazon and maybe at other bookstores.
Yes, Amazon, everywhere where books are sold.
Everywhere but where books are sold. And more importantly, I mean, it's important for you to buy a book, but more importantly, think about how you can utilize these ideas within the place that you work or in your community, because I think that what Rachel is showing us is that in a very practical sense, we can do significant things. We can be persons of impact by simply making our networks function at a high level of interaction and of mutuality. So
that's exactly right. And I think the last thing that I'll say, a theme of my book is, when done properly, networking makes people feel really good. So wouldn't it make you feel good to get an email from someone saying, I loved what you had to say on that conference call. Can we get coffee one day? Oh, you're a ray of sunshine. I'd love to get to know you. Can we grab lunch? When done properly, networking makes people feel good. And when you look at it through that lens, it makes it less scary, because it is scary to think about reaching out to people that you don't know or don't know well. But when you think about how you would feel getting that email, you would feel great.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Rachel, for being on here. And thank you, everyone, for watching. Please subscribe and hit the like button. And if you have a question or a comment, please leave it so that we can interact with you. And that's how networks happen. And we appreciate that. So thank you, Rachel. It's good to meet you. And I look forward to seeing you again. I'm sure we will. And we'll see you all next time here on the Eddy Network podcast. Bye-bye.
Thank you.